more or less like an introduction to me, but I'll try a second. Introduction 2.0. So, my name is Jeffrey Tucker, and is this working? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I work for Laissez-Faire Books, which is a commercial company, and we run the Laissez-Faire Club, and we've been doing it for 14 months now. And when I went to work for them, they said, "We're very glad to have you on board. Unfortunately, we're losing $50,000 a month. Do you think there's anything you can do about that?" So that was very scary. Thank you. But now here we are 14 months later, and our heads are above water, we're making money again, and that's great. And I've learned a lot in the course of being in the commercial world. I'll tell you why I moved over to Laissez-Faire Books. For 25 years, I was at the Mises Institute. And I did a lot of cool things while I was there, and thought it was a fabulous job and a lot of opportunities. But I was in Vienna, and so not everybody in this room has been inside of a men's room and been subject to the sort of conversations that take place in men's rooms. So I'll just kind of pass on to the kind of thing that happens. So an older gentleman came to me, so we were standing there, and he said to me, I enjoyed your speech. So what kinds of things have you done in your professional life? And I said, well, I've worked for the Mises Institute. He said, well, what else? And I said, well, that's what I've done for the last 25 years. And he had a kind of a look on his face of disappointment. You know, like, oh, nonprofit baby, huh? You know, like that. So I was kind of like a little bit crestfallen, and I thought, you know, maybe I should think about the possibility of trying something new if the opportunity presents itself. So the opportunity did present itself, and I decided to sort of take the leap into the commercial world, outside of the sort of cushy world that I was used to, and try something new and daring and unusual, and I must say, deeply destabilizing. And part of what influenced me was that we are living in a time of dramatic change, right? I think we all know that, or do we? We are, and it's shocking how much the world is changing every day. And it's changing sort of in the way that the economist Joseph Schumpeter described it, through destabilizing, through the destruction of old ways and the introduction of new ones, through radical new ways of thinking and being and doing that are enormously risky and sort of shocking. And then the world adapts because they're compelling and persuasive, and thanks to global networks of communications and things, they can attract new people to their good or service, and everything's destabilized. And it's happening so dramatically and so fast. I kind of wanted to be part of that. I wanted to be part of the destabilizing force in the universe, right? I wanted to upset people. I wanted to upset a system. I wanted to smash something and create something new, and leave a mark in some way. And it wasn't an easy decision, because you have to kind of get used to that sense that you don't really know what tomorrow is going to bring. You're going to use your mind and try to figure out as best you can, you know, how you can kind of go forward in a productive way, serving your fellow man. And it's a little bit different from, for example, if you're working for the government, you don't ever have to do this, right? You just kind of show up and stay there. But what I came to believe, and I came to believe it by watching the way the world works these days, is that that we all need that destabilization in our lives. We need newness. And that our penchant for seeking stability is sometimes the worst thing we can ever do for ourselves. Human beings need that sort of friction on our brains. We need to be stunned and shocked a little bit. We need to get used to going to bed at night with a sense that we don't know for sure what all of the answers are, and that we're going to wake up the next day and try out some new things and see if we can find a new answer, and then go to bed that night, with an awareness that some things we did succeeded and some things failed, but with confidence that the next day will present new opportunities and we'll try some new things. And we're always groping our way towards the future. I came to realize within the first few months of working in the commercial world, and I'm sure many of you in this room already do this, and what I'm saying is like no big deal. But I was alarmed to discover that commerce is a little bit tricky and very humbling, actually. And the best metaphor I came up with in the first few months of working there was that I felt like I was rock climbing with a blindfold on. So you kind of know the general direction is up, and you have some degree of confidence that there's another rock you can kind of hold on to. But you're not entirely sure where that rock is, so you have to feel your way forward. And it's a little bit scary because if something goes wrong, you're going to fall, and you're going to fall a long way, right? And that's commerce, and it's scary, and it's not for everybody. And yet, I would suggest that every human being on the planet, in the end, is rock climbing with a blindfold on. That's what everybody is doing. And if we think we're not doing that, we're probably fooling ourselves, because that's the structure of the world. That's the way society is structured, and that's the way human beings progress. Through this kind of trial and error, in the dark, walking through the room, looking for the light to turn on, feeling our way along the walls, looking for the switches. That's the way we all have to navigate the world, and that's the way progress in human history has always taken place. And if we think otherwise, we're probably lying to ourselves. So let me just jump to my conclusion here real quickly, and then I'll back up and tell you how I got there. My thesis is that all of us in this room, and all humanity, needs to start getting used to, starting right now, living in a world without the state. I think that's where we're headed. We're moving to a world where the state is going to evaporate in terms of its relevance for our daily lives. And that is going to be an adjustment. It's an intellectual adjustment, it's a spiritual one, it's an adjustment in the way we conduct our material lives and the way we plan for our futures, where we live, what we do, how we think of ourselves in this place. I think we're moving towards a world of liberty, and this world is going to be very different from the world that had been made for us and constructed for us sometime after World War II by that greatest generation that knew all things. Do you remember those people? Right. They came out of World War II, and there were some very wise people. They set up for us things like monetary systems. And they made for us public schools, and they developed a kind of central plan for all of us. They knew exactly what we all needed. They knew, for example, that every child should more or less start school at the age of 7, and that child should stay in school for as long as possible, and then that child would sort of emerge out of this educational system having done nothing but sit in a desk and listen to a pontificating dictator in front of them. And then you would throw yourself into the workplace at the age of 22 or something, get a great job in an approved corporation, and stay there and climb the corporate ladder to the age of 65, at which point you get a nice, watch or something, and live off the government until you die in this great age called retirement. Oh, at which point, yeah, there'll be plenty of money for you, and also all the medical benefits will be taken care of. And that is the central plan, more or less, that the government, the greatest generation, made for us. I would suggest to you that this plan has been an astonishing and dramatic flop, and that it is no longer working for you or for me or for anybody in the world. And that's not the only system that's not working. Everything they put together is flopped. It's fiscal policies. Now imagine this. You read the economic writings of economists in the 1940s and the 1950s. They were so sure that they knew how to fine-tune this thing that they called the economy, which they knew they had under total control because they could put it in a model and look at it on a piece of paper. And that there were these levers in Washington that would be pulled and pushed by the small council of elite thinkers, and we called them the Council of Economic Advisors. And these people just knew exactly how to make everything work just as it's supposed to do. So sometimes they'd ramp up spending to increase aggregate demand, other times they'd pull it back, and there was this perfect trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Really, it was a big machine. It was a big contraption. But they thought it was just a kind of a big version of, you know, a car or some other thing. You know, you just had to have the right experts running it. Well, that whole fiscal policy thing has completely fallen apart. No aspect of that has worked, and works now at all. And in fact, it's so broken that it can't even be used anymore. They can't even pretend to do it anymore. I mean, every once in a while you hear about how they're using fiscal policy to fix the economy. But it's ridiculous. Basically, they're just bailing out rich people that are well connected with them, right? And everybody kind of knows this. And it's not just the fiscal system, the monetary system is completely broken. That's a recent thing, really, since 2008. It's incredible. You know, the Fed used to believe they could manage money. And now, you know, we're looking at a situation where the entire banking system is basically broken down. And it's not doing anything like what it was supposed to do. They pushed it too far. I mean, the whole machinery, the whole contraption, they sort of abused it to the point of inoperability anymore in the monetary system. And the justice system, it's the same situation. You know, there was a time, I know we don't believe this anymore, but there was a time when people generally thought of the police as being a kind of an extension of the civic order. You know, they were kind of just like us, except that they kind of looked out for bad guys. You know, they're like forum administrators, you know, who banish trolls or something like that. Basically, good guys. But that all changed. It all changed probably starting in after 9/11, so a little more, you know, maybe like 12 years ago, something like that. But they became militarized and more openly part of the statist apparatus, and the law they enforced was no longer even lawfully just. And if you live anywhere in the Northeast, like in New York City, you know those cops can stop you randomly and search you. It's really brutal. But it's pervasive. It's happened even in the smallest town in America. The cops are no longer an extension of the civic order. And to the extent that they seem like that at first, cross them one time, they will turn it instantly into monsters. I mean, the whole criminal justice system has become like deeply paranoid and terrified of the rest of the population. And it's happened in our educational systems now. I mean, it began, you know, 10, 15 years ago, where homeschooling became very popular, and then there's these hybrid homeschools that became ever more popular as people began to achieve astonishing things, and private schools began to flourish and proliferate despite every attempt to suppress them. And when the kids who are still stuck in the public school system stopped believing what people, you know, were telling them, I think a lot of this has to do with anti-drug propaganda. I think that was the sort of the breaking point for the public school system, you know, where the DARE program kind of came in and tried to propagandize everybody. I remember when I was in school, they would get up and we'd have these school assemblies where the anti-drug person would stand up in front of us and, you know, basically explain to their kids, that their parents are all alcoholics, you know, and, you know, they shouldn't do this. So they would sort of conflate you know, heroin and pot and act like they're both equally as dangerous. And things like that. Kids don't believe it anymore, right? So the whole public school system, to the extent that its purpose was to inculcate a kind of, you know, a deep and abiding conviction in the civic religion, you know, it hasn't worked. It's really collapsed. There are other aspects of the state. I mean, the state that the Greatest Generation gave to us was supposed to control all communication. Imagine that. It was supposed to control every aspect of communication. And you know, one time it did. It's amazing to think of it. Just, you know, I think about the days when the phones were distributed. You couldn't buy a phone. It was distributed to you by a government cartel. They came into your house and installed it, and it was attached to the walls with wires. And all you could really do, and that was a big deal actually, when you could buy a very long cord, you know. Okay, So instead of like hanging as well, have you ever gone to old homes where they have like official chairs where you sit in to talk on the phone? You know, like right there. So when you got these long cords of light, you like stretch across the room and like go into another room to talk to your girlfriend. That was a big deal. That was a big deal. So, and to communicate with anybody, with anything, you know, like in print, you had to write it on a piece of paper and stick it in an envelope and write the address on there and then go to the government. They gave you an official stamp and you gave it to a government employee who delivered it, you know. And that was the way the world worked, essentially for a very, very long time. This entire system has been smashed. The communication monopoly is totally crushed. And I don't believe for a second that any of the elites within the statist apparatus ever intended this really to happen. If they knew what would happen in 1995 upon the privatization of the internet, if they could see the future, it never would have been allowed to happen. They made a gross error. In fact, that's pretty much the whole modern history of the state has been one stupid thing after another. The system is not working anymore. It's not working in any respect. Communication, justice, foreign policy. What about that? I mean, it's an amazing thing. You know, maybe I'm sounding to you like a guy from prehistoric times telling you what it was like, you know, when you had to, you know, ride on pterodactyls or something like that. I don't know. Maybe this is not interesting to you. But I'm telling you, there was a time when the US wanted to go to war, and people just kind of went along with it, and presumed that everything the state was saying was true. Those days are long gone. I mean, the ability of the US government to go to war on its own say-so and say, that's a bad guy, and we hate him, and so should you, is really, those days are just completely gone. For the whole foreign policy apparatus, especially in the US empire, has been stretched so thin and so broad. It's again, another system that's been too much. I mean, it's reached the absolute breaking point. And what's another aspect of the state that's sort of one of those command posts? Money, okay? Very important institution to the state. And it's the first thing you want if you're the state, you know, get the money. Then you can control everything. Well, you know, when the internet came along, there have been many, many attempts to create private monies also. Each one has been sort of stepped on and stopped because it had been excessively physical, you know, and there have been too many records. So now we're seeing just the most amazing thing of all, which is the creation of a global Bitcoin economy. And, you know, I don't know if any of you have used this or not, or how many of you have, but I would suggest you not develop any opinions on Bitcoin until you download the blockchain app and acquire some yourself and trade them with your friends, right? I mean, that's a cool thing to do because then you discover something. You discover that this is really viable, it's really serious, and that it's really happening. It's a big deal. And, you know, to some extent, it's a little silly. The other day, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, I guess, of the U.S. Treasury Department came out with this a tut-tutting statement. Well, we've got a problem here. We've got these bitcoins that seem to be going on, or these digital currencies. Let's just be clear that this falls within our regulatory authority. That was basically what the statement said. So anybody who's kind of dealing these things, especially minors, we're going to consider them as fair targets, you know, for our enforcement. I mean, anybody involved in this world, to any extent, people weren't afraid. It was like, oh, the government came out with a piece of paper, you know. They uploaded a PDF, and that's supposed to change the world? It doesn't change the world, it doesn't change anything. They've completely lost control of the system. And the key thing is that the world that's being constructed now by the market economy is vastly outracing and outpacing the state and its kind of reactionary, regulatory, status quo apparatus. And it's going so fast that there's, at this point, no way it could ever possibly catch up. And it's going to continue to happen this way. We're seeing the world reconstructed and reinvented in ways that are amazing. I can't predict every way in which this is true. And this is how difficult it is to predict the future and to imagine these kind of alternatives. I mean, if 20 years ago I told somebody who was licking a stamp, yeah, let's make it 25 years ago, licking a stamp and writing a letter, and said, I walked up to the person and said, hey, you know, in 25 years, you know, you're not going to be doing that stuff. You're going to be typing on your own personal computer and sending off little text messages to people all over the world, and it's going to cost you nothing. Not even 35 cents. I mean, it's going to cost you like nothing to do this. They would say to me, well, that's insane. You know, that's not going to happen, actually. In fact, you're kind of a lunatic, really, for even dreaming like this. Just how difficult it is to anticipate the future. Do you realize you love the show The Jetsons, right? I mean, everybody loves it. I love The Jetsons. And the Jetsons had lots of cool technology, you know, in there. And they imagined the way the world was in 1962, and they tried to dream up everything. But they missed email. I mean, nobody sends email on the Jetsons. It's very funny. Like when Elroy's at school and he gets in trouble, the robot teacher like writes a note. He has to like put it in his pocket, and he gets to go through his tube, you know, flying through the sky. You know. And he has to deliver the note to his parents, you know. Like they could not even anticipate. And that's how amazing the technology is. Or, you know, I dreamed my whole life of having a video phone, you know, where I could actually like talk to people and look at them and stuff like that. Because they have them on Jetsons, but in the Jetsons world, they're like strapped up high and they're huge and they have a big back, just like televisions in the 60s or something. And you could only like stand in one place. And you had to like, do you remember that in Jetsons they had a special, like if you woke up in the morning and you got a phone call, you didn't want to, you were unpresentable, so you had like a mask to put on, you know. It's very funny. Anyway, so Stefan and I were coming over, Stefan Kinsella and I were driving over here, and I just pulled up my Skype app because I have a friend who's the conductor of the Westminster Choir in England that we love to gossip about the Pope. And I just had this desperate hunger to get the latest Pope gossip. So I called him, and suddenly he's there. He's like on this little thing, and I'm talking to him, and the reception is perfect. And I'm showing him Texas out the window, and he's like, you know, staring like amazement. That's what Texas looks like. And he's like in London, and he's talking to me, and the whole thing is weird. I mean, the whole thing is so miraculous. You know what's weird about this? We all take it for granted, right? There's no New York Times headline, oh, guess what? Video phone is finally here and it's free. No, it's like we kind of go one way or the next. There's adopting these new technologies, and we just kind of shrug our shoulders and move on. So I think it's kind of important for us to sort of realize all the ways in which the world is being redeveloped and reinvented all around us. And the world we live in now is something, I mean, our parents, when they were our age, couldn't conceive of, or their grandparents before them. Certainly, inconceivable. The world is being reinvented. And how does the state fit into this? My point is the state has very little to do with this new world. Certainly it hasn't come up with any of these new technologies. I mean, you know, something like Bitcoin wasn't invented by, you know, the Ben Bernanke of the Bitcoin world. You know? And there's no, you know, official board that meets, what do you think the price of Bitcoin should be today? Well, I don't know, let's vote, you know. It doesn't work like that. And there's no audit the Bitcoin movement, right? Because it's open source, you know, so this whole apparatus that the state constructed, it's going away. And I think the question is why now? And I think you have to look back to kind of understand where the modern state came from and how it's evolved over time and how its purpose and its ethos has changed over time. You have to kind of throw yourself back, say, to the late 19th century. A very interesting time. This was a time when a whole generation came to believe in the possibility of human progress, which is no small thing. I mean, it's a great thing. I mean, think about it. 99.99% of human history, there was no progress whatsoever. None. I mean, people weren't living that much better in 1700 than they lived in 1700 BC. Really. I mean, there was vast. Majority of human history has just been pretty much static. The average age was You know, 32, you know, 2 out of 3 kids died in childbirth, most people slept at night on straw, and bugs ate their back, and stuff like that. And most of life consisted of trying to get the next meal. You know, food is a real problem in this world, it turns out, because you can't just eat on January 1st and then, you know, live off that for the next 6 months or something. No, you have to pretty much eat every day. So food was a big problem in the state of nature. It's been a big problem for all of human history. And of course, in our times, we didn't even worry about food, right? We complain about it. Well, McDonald's, well, their food's too cheap. It's making everybody fat. And it's impossible for me to take this stuff seriously. When people complain about Walmart, come on! I mean, in all of human history, anybody who ever walked into a Walmart would have been convinced that they had died and gone to, you know, the Islamic version of heaven or something like that. I don't know, does the Christian view of heaven include like massive goods and services? I'm not so sure. Never been laid out to me all that clearly, but anyway. So my point is, in the late 19th century, there was a new conviction concerning human progress. It basically consisted of, we need to accumulate ever more capital and ever more wealth, and we can live in an age of unending peace and prosperity. And the old world is dying, that consisted of, you know, these futzy reactionary wig-wearing kings and dukes and princes and things like that, and the new world is going to be capitalists and the owners of wealth. This was a new dawn for civilization, or so that generation believed. And it was about in this period that we began to see this thing that was called, I mean, I guess the Communist Manifesto was written in, what, like 1870, right? Kind of weird to think about it. You know, at the dawn of the Gilded Age, we get the Communist Manifesto. So Marxism is sort of alive and well. And the kind of socialism that generation of Marxists and socialists, and you include the Fabians a little bit later, advocated was what they called scientific socialism. And they distinguished their scientific socialism from the socialists of the Middle Ages and the crazy mystics of the past, you know, with their collectivist fantasies and things like that. And so what was the difference between scientific socialism and what you might call chiliastic socialism, which I'll talk about in just a second? The difference is that the scientific socialists believed in progress just as much and just as thoroughly as the advocates of capitalism of the time. Everybody more or less agreed that human beings should progress, that we should have social systems that bring about that progress, that progress should be widespread, should touch all classes in society, and that oppression should end, exploitation should stop, and we should march onward and upward into the light with ever more human betterment. I mean, that's a good description, more or less, of what your typical socialist believed in the 1890s. And the capitalists believed the same thing. So there ensued this big debate, right? What is the best means to achieve this great end of human flourishing for all of humanity? And it was an interesting debate, and it took many shifts and turns, and it lasted about 50 years, probably until World War II. But there was not a disagreement on the goal. There was a disagreement on the means to achieve that goal. I don't know if, I love to watch these sort of movies that try to recreate, you know, the past in some way, and, you know, that portray the world in the 19th century, late 19th century, you know, and you have English socialists talking, they talk just like us. You know, they want to end oppression. They want to end monopolies and cartels where people are looting others. They wanted peace, right? That's a big socialist goal at the time. And the big argument was, how best do we get there? Well, guess what? The scientific socialists had their day. And it was strange how it all happened, because basically it was World War I that unleashed it all. That gave them their chance to try out their system. World War I stumbled into more or less accidentally, why not we just have a war and see how it goes and try out our new contraptions? Well, it didn't go so well, did it? The US, they set up a central planning apparatus, inflated the money supply, and started taxing people incomes directly and created a central bank out of this whole experience to fund the war, basically. In Russia, it was the same situation. They drafted people, sent them off to foreign lands to have them slaughtered, inflated the money supply. And that pissed off a lot of people. They revolted, and instead of turning towards freedom, they turned to the opposite direction, towards ever more communism, ever more socialism. And in the US, we were left with a kind of a new state that we had never known before, something that was vast and mean and invasive and stole from people. And we let it go. We let it go. We pulled back a little bit in the 1920s. We left enough of it in place that it caused, gigantic calamities in the form of the Great Depression. Then we put in a new planning apparatus. It was another second chance for the great socialist experiment. So now we had socialism of various forms tried all over the world, all throughout the 20th century. In World War II, that was not an argument about what kind of social system we're going to have. It was an argument between, many different forms of nasty states that they were just trying to blow each other up. A very wicked, horrible controversy. But then something very strange began to happen. 2/3 of the way through the century, I would say it was in the 1960s. People began to look around and notice that socialism, though it sat out to bring prosperity and achieve human flourishing, actually resorted in some pretty bad stuff. Not only vast murder and death, but even for those untouched by war, prosperity stopped working for the middle class anymore. And incomes began to be flat. And the planning apparatus stopped working. The trade-off between inflation and unemployment no longer seemed to be there. People began to get annoyed by taxes. So socialism didn't actually achieve its aims. And this became really more and more obvious in the late 1960s. And so the scientific form of socialism began to kind of erode as an intellectual apparatus, as an excuse for the state, as its ideological cover. And that's when we began to see a huge change. And a generation of dedicated socialists turned on a dime. Everything shifted. They said, practically overnight, you got it all wrong. We never intended to make people wealthier, really. That wasn't really the goal. We weren't trying to unleash massive, freedom on the world and peace. That was never the point. The point was that we want to achieve something else. We want to revive a golden age. We want to revive a golden age when we lived at one with nature and with each other. And that may not be prosperity at all. In fact, that may involve growing amounts of poverty, especially for the middle class. But it's a sacrifice we have to make in order to achieve this golden age. So we see a reversion, and the famous book in this regard is John Kenneth Galbraith's book. It's called, Stephen, help me out.
The Affluent Society.
The Affluent Society. So he's bitching the whole book. You know what, we're too affluent. We've just got too much money. It's a problem. Look at it. It was decadently lounging around our swimming pools and being able more stuff. And, this is like corrupting spiritually of us. It's really just horrible. And the worst thing about what's happening, according to Galbraith, is that it's starving the state. The state is over there like the suffering peasant, going, give me resources. And you people are just, lounging on your yachts and enjoying life. And this is just not right. So Galbraith began this kind of new push to reinvent socialism. And it was a reversion to not a scientific form, but a chiliastic form. And I spell it Chiliastic. Chiliastic. And the idea of chiliastic socialism is that it's a kind of a mystical view, right? It's this view that society would be. There was a time when everything was wonderful and beautiful, and we had perfect liberty, perfect human flourishing, and perfect equality, and we all lived at one with ourselves and our neighbors, and especially with God. And there were no imbalances in the universe, and you could make up whatever kind of utopian vision you want. it used to be that way, and then something terrible happened in history, like there was an intervention, and then we began to all kind of like become corrupt. So the goal of chiliastic socialism is to uproot this evil thing from the world. And the chiliastic socialists of the late 1960s and 1970s said that that evil thing was the ability of all of us in this room and all of humanity to control private property in ways that created more wealth. This was the great event in history that ruined everything. The advent of private property and the advent of laissez-faire capitalism. So this is what must be destroyed. And we're going to destroy it a little bit at a time. So really, the state should stop all this thing that it used to do to make us better off, like build big bridges or electrify, bring electricity to rural areas. And that's what the New Deal state used to be, right? They would kind of show up in your community and say, we're going to build a big dam here, and here's going to be a wonderful little park, and we're going to bring you happy things to make your life better off. They don't do that anymore, right? That's not even part of what the government does. Now they just annoy you. And that's like the main thing the government does. Like if you want to do something, there's a bureaucrat going, no, that's a problem. So if you want to like take a long shower or something, the government's like, you just don't need to have a long shower. You want a toilet that works, it's just, your toilet works too well, so we're going to regulate it and change it. You want a really cool looking car, that whole cool car thing is not working for us. Cars have to be the following shape and size, and they can't use too much gas. And if you hit a pedestrian, we want the head to go this way and not that way. And, so now they're centrally planning cars. So basically, they're setting out to kind of like ruin our lives in every possible way. I mean, the Bitcoin thing was an interesting one. This FinCEN regulation. Instead of the government coming out and saying, hey, this Bitcoin stuff is really great because people are doing it voluntarily. If people are willing to do it and they're undertaking it, it must be to their own benefit. So, as the government, we're for that. Because we want people to part it. No. The automatic instinct of the state is to say, there's a problem. People are doing things and they're doing it willingly and voluntarily and they're succeeding at it in ways that are enhancing their lives. This must stop. All government regulations do this nowadays. I mean, you know how pervasive this is? And you can't get away from it anymore. Like, it wasn't too long ago, I ran out of gas in Opelika, Alabama. And so I had to call the local service station. I said, it's absurd. But can you bring me like some gas? Because I'm out. And so he said, yeah, I'll be right there. So it came over and he starts putting gas in and he says, it's taking forever. Like the can just like won't pour. What's wrong? He goes, yeah, it's just these new gas cans. I said, what's wrong? He said, well, I don't know, it just doesn't work. I'm just going to be here like 10 minutes pouring this thing. He says, the new gas cans don't work anymore. I thought, what do you bet? What do you bet? So I went home and did a quick Google search. Well, it turns out, there are new federal regulations on gas cans now, where you're not allowed to put a vent on the other side. So instead of gas pouring out like a normal gas can, now it goes, it sort of curls, it's spilling stuff everywhere or whatever. So they destroyed the gas can. I mean, look, I just give that and now you have to like hack your gas can. Right, in order to do that. So I give that as an example, but I mean, this applies to like hundreds of thousands of products. And every day, I'm friends with the restaurant owner who deals with this stuff like constantly. There's a new note that comes out from the Restaurant Regulatory Association or whatever that says, all those cotton aprons you bought, to populate for all your employees. We're not going to allow this anymore because, I don't know, the health standards or something. So, and also there's a company that's making, paper aprons that gave us a lot of money, during an election campaign. So you should be using his and not. So this goes on like all the time. Every business faces this. I mean, you look at how banks and investment firms are having to deal with Dodd-Frank. I mean, this is an insane and idiotic piece of legislation that has nothing to do with reality in any way. It's impossible to comply with. And they're doing the same thing to healthcare. In every way, the government is trying its best. This is the point. This is the difference between scientific socialism and chiliastic socialism. Instead of trying to make us better off, they're now really happy with the idea that they are going to make us suffer all the time. You don't like fluorescent lights? Too bad. You've got to use them. You know, you want to go on a long drive and burn up a lot of gas? No, that's not going to happen. I mean, every aspect of our lives is controlled now in ways that make us worse. And what I'm telling you is that this is an unsustainable form of state. Like, no state can really get away with this for very long. And this is happening, this new form of state, the misery state, is happening at the same time the digital world has been unleashed all over the planet to create new forms of prosperity and new inventions and new amazingness all around us. And these things are happening simultaneously. This is the great clash of our age. Cool new stuff provided by private enterprise that makes our lives better off and allows us to do anything we want better, or the misery state that regulates us and makes us suffer and gets on our nerves every single second. And this dynamic cannot but end in one way, and that is with total victory of us over them. And we're seeing it on a daily basis. That's why I say we all need to be preparing to live in a world without the state as we've known it. This is our future. So, what does this mean we have to do? I have no idea what time I'm supposed to stop talking or anything, but I'll just wrap up.
No, fine.
Okay. So, a number of things I would say that this requires of us. I mentioned at the outset that we all need to kind of get used to instability. I think that in the future we need to start seeking out instability in our lives. We are all too comfortable with the status quo. We need to start taking risks in our own lives because the world is changing and we have to change with it. And we're going to seize on new opportunities, especially young people. This is really true. We need to stop fearing the future and start embracing it. That's a general point. I think specifically this means we need to stop fearing technology. For 20 years, I've heard so many people debunk technology. Oh, that's never going to work. And you know, when Amazon opened up, David Broder and the Washington Post said, wow, that's never going to work. He said, you know, if you think about it, this is a stupid thing. I mean, like, what? Some guy buys like an address on the World Wide Web and then starts to sell books on it, and it's never going to work. Because after all, if it succeeds, then somebody else will just copy the idea and take away whatever kind of monopoly profits Amazon temporarily enjoys, and they'll never be able to get a foothold in this world of the web. Web commerce can't work, and Amazon can't work, because anybody can be Amazon.com. Well, he was, dreadfully wrong, right? But this has been going on forever. People continue to debunk, like Facebook. Oh, that's just stupid. You're just wasting. Oh, you're on Facebook again? That's what mom said to the kids. You're on Facebook again? I mean, why don't you do something real? You know, like, I don't know, go outside and chase around a little hoop like in Victorian times. That's like real stuff. You know, but Facebook, no, that's what it's Twitter, oh, that's stupid. I don't care what you have for lunch. You know, this is the way people debunk, all the new technology. I'm telling you that technology just isn't forced on us. It doesn't come to us like bad weather or grasshopper hordes, invading us, or the javelinas out of the hills of Southwest Texas. Technology. So that rhetorical side I picked up from Mohammed. Yeah. Anyway, technology comes to us and it succeeds because it benefits us. So we need to understand and learn that some technology is working, embrace it and make it your own. Do you realize what an unprecedented opportunity you have and I have in this world? No people in the history of the world have had such a fabulous opportunity to accumulate personal capital unto yourself that you can port around from place to place throughout your whole life, wherever you live, and whatever company you work for, and whatever profession you're involved in. You can port this personal capital with you. And you know what it is? It's your network. It's yours. It belongs to you, not to the company you work for. That's amazing. Not to the state, not to the community in which you live. It's yours. It's your own. And the fact that people are not taking advantage of this is amazing to me. I mean, if you don't have a LinkedIn account that you really work on, trying to make a serious thing in your life, you're crazy. I mean, Twitter, You can develop followers, and on Facebook, you should be friending people and working on your networks. This is capital that you will own as individuals. It doesn't matter, you might be working for IBM today, and tomorrow you're going to work for Microsoft, and then decide to become a private entrepreneur. This portable capital can go from place to place. No people in history have ever been in a position to be able to do this. This is amazing. It's amazing. In the old days, when you quit one job and went to the next job, you were starting from scratch. You had nothing to take with you except your resume, and your physical body. And that's proved to be pathetic. Now we can take with us from place to place, whatever we have to be doing, wherever we're going. We can take this private personal network with us. We can port it around from place to place. So that's my second advice for living without the state. Develop a network and get serious about it. Another thing, we need to stop feeling a sense of guilt when the time comes when we have to do things that are not necessarily legal. What I mean to say is that we have to choose our own human flourishing over obedience to our civic needs. We need to be willing, under the right conditions, in other words, to break bad.
Yes.
We do. Because that's what's being forced on us. If we comply, we die. That's the future we're looking at. I don't think you should get in trouble. I don't want you to go to jail. And I don't think that you should just walk into, you should stay away from the police as much as possible, and like that. But my point is that you shouldn't feel a sense of guilt when you fail to recycle, or when you hack your shower head, or when you build your own car in the garage that's out of compliance with regulations, or when you, buy something on the Silk Road, you buy a fake ID on the Silk Road, which some people have been known to do. Or when you're dealing in Bitcoins, you try some new technologies. I mean, be wise, be smart, be prudent, but break bad if you have to, and don't feel guilty about it. You know why? Because the state is not God. The state is not in charge of defining what is right and wrong. The state is not the owner of your conscience. It's not the owner of you. Only you are. And only you are in charge of deciding what is right and wrong. And you must defer to something much more magnificent and wonderful than the state, which is, natural law, the whole of human history, tradition, your religious community, whatever it's going to be. Choose your authorities for yourself. And don't believe that just because, the president claims to be in charge of you, that he really is. He is not. And you don't have to let him if you don't want to. So breaking bad is going to be a way of life in the future, and it's something that we need to get used to. Another thing I would suggest in the future without the state is that we have to think outside the central plan. Meaning that we have to know what that plan is, right? We can't think outside the box if we don't know that we're in a box. So you have to discover what that box is. There's a period of discovery. And I think particularly in the world of education, you have to understand that this greatest generation after World War II decided the way you're supposed to live and the way you're supposed to learn. They had a plan for your life. You don't have to go along with that. There are other ways you can learn besides being strapped to a desk in a government institution and paying a gigantic amount of money for it. All right? There are other ways to learn. And if you have children, you can rethink things. It's very interesting. If you teach your child to read by the age of 4 or 5, that child's first grade teacher, if he's someone in public school, did you know this, will be extremely annoyed at you.
That's true.
Yeah. Thank you. That's good. But it's generally true. And by the way, I don't necessarily blame the public school teachers here, right? I mean, they don't have a lot of time. They've got a hugely diverse crowd of students. They've got to kind of stay on task. And they want to more or less start everybody at the same place. And they don't like it when brilliant, smart-ass kids show up and pretend to be, and are visibly bored all the time and still make A's. And that's extremely annoying, all right? So what I'm suggesting is, why not instead of deferring to the system, go ahead and teach them to read at the age of 4 or 5. And then think about other alternatives. Look, it sounds like a small thing. It's a revolutionary act in the system today. To break bad, to go outside the box, to live outside the central plan. Once you discover it, to depart from it. How about this? What about you have a child who's 13 or 14, and that child is headed towards the sort of famous junior high school years, and you know what that means. Probably not much good. And you decide, well, I think I'm just going to put this child in college. Are you allowed to do that? You are. It takes some tricks and some tweaking, and you might have to print out a high school diploma from your computer. But you can do it. And throw that child into the rough and rolly world of college at an early age. Why not? Or another solution is don't make the child go to college if the child doesn't want to go to college. In other words, there's many ways to learn, many ways to conduct your life that aren't necessarily in compliance with what they told us to do. Okay, other ways to live outside the state. I'm getting down to some real practical things here, okay? But what does Ben Bernanke want you to do? I mean, he's like part of the central planning apparatus. He's got a plan for your life, right? He has an idea of how he wants you to use your resources and spend your money. What is it? Ben Bernanke wants you, well, his interest rates are like 0 now, right? Yeah. So he wants you to ramp up your spending and live in as highly leveraged way as possible. And this is a speculation. I mean, we've had like 3 different presidents in a row that keep telling us that we should go out and spend money. I mean, Bush got it. He said, well, what's my best response to 9/11? I say, go out and spend money. That's what Bush said. Like Obama says the same thing. I mean, Bernanke wants you in debt, and the President of the United States wants you to spend as much money as possible. This should be a signal to you that there's a slight problem. Right? If you are highly leveraged, and you're living at the very highest level you can relative to your income, and you have debt on top of that, your mobility in life is severely restricted. You suddenly are not really in a position to make dramatic changes. You're not really in a position to leave your job and move to somewhere where there's more opportunity. To ramp down your lifestyle so you can become part of a startup where you're going to sacrifice your present income for possible future income later. You suddenly cut off a lot of options in your life. I would just suggest to you that if you want to prepare yourself for the world of the future, a world without the state, that you only live as high, in a material sense, as your next best employment opportunity. And that's going to require a little bit of soul searching on your part. I've seen young people's lives ruined by getting a great job right out of college. Do you know what I mean by that? They go from like 0 income to suddenly getting $65,000, and they're like, whoa, I'm here, right? And suddenly they've got a house, they've got filled with furniture, they get 2 cars, and everything's just insane. Everything goes crazy. They're spending at the top of it. Next thing you know, they turn around 5 years later, they're no longer free. They're no longer independent, they're no longer free. They're tied down. Suddenly they hate their boss, there's nothing they can do about it. They can't move because they can't sell their house, they've got too much stuff. They're ruined. And suddenly they're inflexible, they're not in a position to take advantage of this new world that's coming about. I'm just suggesting to you that to prepare yourself to live in a world outside, in a world where a collapsing public sector, collapsing state, and a new dynamic market economy, living without debt and living way below your means is a very good idea. And not everybody's in a position to do it. I'm just giving you that heads up. It's something to think about in the future. On the matter of health insurance, being tied to your, who set up this rotten system where our businesses give our health insurance? What the hell is that? It makes no sense whatsoever, right? It came about in World War II with the government intervention, basically. Companies decided they wanted to pay their employees, but the wages were controlled. So they began to put health insurance as part of a benefits package as a way of compensating employees so the government would let them pay anymore. Then the handful of companies that actually did this successfully imposed that as a kind of national law and became became the norm as a competitive device to crush their less well-capitalized competitors. I mean, that's the way we got this system. But we're stuck with it now, right? Not necessarily. There might be a way for you to secede from your employer's health care. It's a very good idea. I've talked to many people who are working now in jobs they can't stand and living in places they hate, stuck in life, unable to move. And you say, well, why don't you just quit? The very first thing they say, well, you gotta have that health care, man. It's bad. You know, isn't it funny? The left is always telling us how healthcare has liberated the American worker. Oh, look at these wonderful benefits that we're making business give the employees. It hasn't liberated workers. It's given employers vast, exploitative power over their workforces. I mean, it's achieved exactly the opposite. Now, you know, the boss is in a position to essentially blackmail every employee. If you walk away from here and you get sick, you're going to die. What the hell kind of system is that? So if you can get out of it and purchase your own health care, even if it costs a little bit more, but you can carry around that card that's got your name on it and not your company's name on it, that gives you all the more freedom. So anyway, I just throw these ideas out here as practical tips to looking in towards the future. The big theme I would like to tell you is that this is our future. The world you live in right now, the world of your networks, the world of communication globally with people on Skype and Twitter and Facebook and trying out all the new apps and the way you're constantly doing this, you know, anytime you're in line at the grocery store. This is the future. Those huge buildings with the big columns and the stuffy people, that is not the future, they are the past. Prepare your life, prepare your children's lives, and let's all look forward to a new and fabulous and surprising form of liberty in the future. Thank you very much.